Okay, I'm going to see how quickly I can follow up. It may take a while. On the video that I just posted yesterday on Christian apology acceptance. And in there, I was, I guess, roughly suggesting that guilt is the origin of religion, organized religion, not that organized religion creates this thing called guilt and then, inculcates it in the youth. My My own sense of it would be that once organisms reach a certain level of sophistication, they naturally encumber what I'm going to call guilt. Now, maybe part of the haggle is what is being meant by guilt, and I am admittedly drawing upon two thinkers, largely Ernest Becker and Kenneth Burke. And what I thought I would do is try to clarify that and see if I can't lay out, maybe even in more detail, what the kind of position I'm after, which I've said in so many different videos. I mean, I think part of the problem is I have too many videos up, and it's taxing for people to go through it all and to see, in some of the videos I'm trying to provoke response from different groups, and then the overall picture, I think, gets lost as some people are, they're reacting as if I'm a fundamentalist religious type or as if I'm an atheist, and I guess I'm getting caught between cross traffic from either side, which I guess I'm sort of interested in. I've been trying to, I think, position myself somewhere in between those. So at any rate, one of the ways to come at guilt is to come at it like this. And this is what I mean by guilt. I don't just mean, a wrongdoing that you then have remorse over. I think that's one way to get at it. But that's more a symptom of the structure of guilt than the actual phenomena. Okay, for Becker, he would say it that guilt comes because you can feel blocked without knowing why. See, as an expression, that probably doesn't work for people. But think about it this way, that if you were finite but not self-aware, you would never experience guilt. If you were self-aware but not finite, you would never experience guilt. Humans experience guilt because they're both. We're both finite and yet self-aware. And that's what, it's what Becker calls the existential dread. It's the paradox of being fancy worm food. Why such fancy worm food, he would ask. Now, a different way to come at that is to try to look at the evolution of self-aware consciousness. That is, how did self-aware consciousness emerge in nature, and what was its earliest register, its earliest experience or comprehension of itself? I think rather than being something like Descartes' I think, therefore I am, which in fact is very modern, very literate, right? It's a product of literacy. The earliest expression of self-awareness was the gods are, therefore I am. That is, they needed some distance to recognize themselves, and the self-reflexive moment wasn't just conscious doubling over on itself. It was projecting an other outward and then imagining that that other was hailing one as an object. That is, I recognized myself as an other for the other, and that was the dawn of self-awareness in humanity. But the other was a projected other, an imagined other. In my argument, it would be an other who was needed to give thanks to in order to help expiate the guilt that it was coming from the emergence of self-awareness. Okay, now when I say that there was a guilt, a natural guilt sort of equates with the emergence of self-awareness in finite organisms, and that's us. It's sort of like if you ask the question, how can humans be utterly dependent, and we're utterly dependent, and yet experience autonomy and individuation? I mean, we experience conscious choice, and we say, well, will I do this or will I do that? And we can deliberate. We can think of our own projects and goals with an awareness and a deliberative process. And yet there are so many factors outside of us that hinder and limit and curtail. And it's that balance of somehow an organism who does experience, again, an existential moment of autonomy. We experience autonomy despite the fact that we are bound within a physically closed system. We need sleep, we need food, we need physical contact with others, we need attention from others, we need countless forms of commerce with the larger world. I mean, not only atmospheric pressure and the various forms of nutrient, but just ongoing breathing, metabolism in all of its forms. There is a dependency that is largely unseen. It's felt, maybe registered in the backdrop, but it's sort of in a balancing act between the experiences of autonomy that we have and of self-legislation and self-governance. Now, I think, okay, so that's part of what I'm getting at with guilt. When we're talking about guilt, guilt is it's the dawning of self-awareness in a finite being, and it kind of propels the organism to need to give to imagine someone who you could give back to. And see, this is part of that dependency issue. See, I think the point is that as organisms, let's try it this way. Earliest tribal peoples, who tens of thousands of years, people lived in small bands of hunter-gatherers. I think they were more honest, just frankly, in a way, about their dependency upon nature than modern, individual, industrialized Western societies. We have a tendency to engage in what I've tried to identify, again, coming out of Becker, certainly coming out of Burke as well, is this notion of the causa sui project. Now, the causa sui project is the sense that people are completely of their own making. The sense that each of us have of making something of yourself, of doing something with your life, of feeling like it's under your prerogative to make something of oneself. That is a very, very modern notion, but it's caught within larger cultural practices by which we try to get some kind of control over nature. We're almost to the point of self-cause now in this point in history, where we're kind of like standing on our own two legs as if we're going to beat nature back into size, or we're gonna beat it back compared to us. But I think we're mistaken, that nature is so overwhelming and so overpowering that at best we're just eking out spaces where the freedom feels wider and wider. And we've been amazing the way we've been able, humans, modern Western humans, have been able to conquer space and distance in a way that was unimaginable. Here I'm posting up this video that can be watched around the world. We've put people on the moon. We've through microscope and telescope, we have opened up the cell of the very cells of the body, germplasm, and germ theory. All of the, I guess, the kind of scientific discoveries that we've had, these have fed into the causa sui project, where we try to combat nature and can find a space for our own agency and our own autonomy. But we cover over our dependency. We cover over the way that the dependency hasn't gone away. And at a moment's notice, just out of nowhere, you can get hit by a lightning bolt. You can have all of your conscious plans well thought out, your self-disciplined body on a trajectory for you to pursue what you are in a very, again, self-governing way, and brain aneurysm, earthquake, flood, fire, spontaneous accident. There are ways that we are helplessly dependent upon forces that are beyond our control. And this is despite the fact that we experience ourselves as in some degree autonomous. The argument, again, as I'm trying to suggest, is that religious sentiments grow out of that feeling. And for Becker, it's kind of like there's an anxiety that gets introduced as organisms become self-aware. So as they become self-aware, there's a loss of instinctual drive. Now, humans perhaps do have some instincts still. I mean, they're grasping instincts, and there's an instinct to babble, but the instincts have been rubbed down, and now they're in need of what Becker calls instinctivization. And instinctivization is the degree to which culture rounds out the individual, and the cultural rounding out, it forms an anxiety buffering function. Now, what that means is that the tendency to act, it starts to unfold within culturally prescribed dimensions. It has a kind of orientation that it takes out of cultural practices, and it's all kinds of things. It's dietary sensibilities. It's the again, everything from what you think a good day looks like, what occupations are. I mean, all of these kinds of forms, they're cultural ways that the organism, I guess, again, staves off the organismal anxiety of what is it, what is all of this, what sense to make of this larger world given the degrees of self-awareness. I mean, one way to say it is that, we don't, by the time you introduce this notion of self-awareness, and it started to dawn, I guess, we could put the date back. It depends on where you're going to put it. Some people are going to put it back further. I mean, maybe 30,000 years. Some people are going to say 10. Certainly, people were very, very self-aware at least 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. What we would recognize as self-reflexive conscious awareness. But the differences between having desires, which I think all organisms do, they have desires, but humans know about their desires. They can think about their desires, and they can think about their desires in terms of cultural forms and what those cultural forms say are the socially acceptable and culturally approved ways of satisfying and meeting those desires. And so the organismal drives toward needing food, needing contact, I guess having desires for sexuality, all of those get constrained or they get shaped into again, culturally intelligible and culturally ratified expressions or pursuits. Now, I mean, I guess what I say there, that, oh geez, yeah, I guess I'm sort of all over the place there. The point, if I could, geez, I don't even know how to regroup my troops now. I think the issue is that I don't myself think of myself as an atheist, and when I say that, I would also want to add that I'm not a believer. See, I've heard some people say I'm not a believer and I'm an atheist, and they've used that expression sort of synonymously, and I don't. I don't think of myself having a theology of faith or belief. If anything, I'm interested in what I've called a biologically friendly theology. I'm interested in a theology of death acceptance, a kind of spirituality without religion, a spirituality grounded in the reality of guilt. And I think guilt is very real. I think that we do recognize our dependence and we try to hide from it in various ways. I don't, again, when I say I'm not a believer, but I'm also not an atheist, at least I don't describe myself that way. I mean, if other people want to call me that, they can call me whatever they want. I guess I really don't care. My guess is some people are calling me a believer and some people are calling me atheist. I wouldn't call myself either. My own spiritual beliefs, I guess I'll call them religious beliefs, they have to do with, you know, all religions are true when you look to those truths that the religious institutions, those religious texts have, once you wean them from the dogma. I mean, the question is, can we learn to live the various truths of the religions, the kinds of wisdom that they offer for self-aware finite organisms? What are the kinds of particular problems that are encumbered by self-aware finitude? I mean, once we move into that, I see so many different faiths. Now, not all of religions are true. I don't mean it that way. I mean all religions are true. That is, each religion, as it emerged, it was trying to register certain insights about living, about forgiveness, compassion, about love, about the kinds of time that are introduced into nature with such an organism. That is, finite self-awareness is a unique mode of time, and that's what we are. You know, we're a unique mode of time. If anything, I mean, I think part of the problem would be, I've said before, negative theology. I find somewhat useful. There's a lot of resources there that if a person wants to claim the word God, say they still want to use the word God, I guess I would rather say, well, let's not even use the word. Let's just talk about the divine ground of being, the condition of possibility for existence. I mean, we could use different language for it. The regulative order that emerged, that made way for the development of life, the harmonious balance that had to be achieved in order for existence to occur. I mean, again, there are different ways. But if a person does want to use God, I would want to say, well, let's stick with negative theology then. That is, if there is a God, it couldn't be anything that anyone could ever know. It would be beyond all thought. It would be beyond what our little monkey brains could imagine. We're little animals chattering noises we couldn't possibly reference. It wouldn't be a guy, it wouldn't be a person, wouldn't be a thing, wouldn't be, if anything, again, I think you want to move toward regulative order in the cosmos, and the meaning that was, the meaning that was etched into that possibility. I mean, how was it possible for notions of the divine to emerge in nature? That is, if you look at the world and it has all of this natural biodiversity, okay, there's all these different kinds of flowers and all these different kinds of vegetables and plants, and we have just wide ranges of animals, and you have reptiles and all this sort of stuff, clouds and ice crystals. And you also have different kinds of religion. Why? Where did that come from? I mean, what is it about the rangy kind of biodiversity on this planet that one of the strange kinds of flowers that has emerged out is religious sentiment and religious experience? I mean, why? What were the ontological prerequisites or the ontological preconditions that made that possible? I mean, how is it possible that nature evolved organisms that could imagine deities? I mean, why? What is that? Of all that could have been, I mean, I can imagine a world, I mean, can't we? Can't we kind of imagine a world where deities would have never been imagined, where the organisms would have just evolved and they would have never had to go through this phase of imagining a radical other in order to come to their own self-awareness? I mean, can't we? Or does it seem like there's something, I don't know, that's telling us something when we say that, yeah, the humans, I don't know, they seem to have a notion of the divine in order to register themselves in a kind of self-awareness. That was part of the problem that nature cropped up. Now, I don't think, now this is where the dogma stuff comes in. I don't think any of that, though, means that you have any sense of what the religion would say. So, I mean, to say that for me to say that I don't understand atheism, okay, and I don't. I find trouble with it, and it's not like I think it's wrong. I just don't get it. I must be too stupid. I'm unable to understand the position. Now, that doesn't mean that I go, oh yes, of course, all the religions are. That's correct. Like there's a guy in the sky and he does all this kind of stuff, or there's a being who will judge, or any of the supernatural divine intervention stuff. I think both of those are an error. What you end up saying is, if there would be a God, it's beyond all thought. If anything, we do have religious experiences, and those religious experiences, various people do, maybe some people don't. I think some people actually have very deep religious experiences. And those experiences is what I would use. That's why it has nothing to do with belief or faith or anything like this. No, religious experience is a direct experience of harmony and order in the world, and it's filled with contradictory, paradoxical emotions in an instant. It has to do with feelings of horror and joy and beauty and wonder, and it's filled with anxiety and remorse, but it also has a reconciling forgiveness in it. I mean, I think it's a knot of many different feelings, and again, a person can be seized, their whole body can feel a direct connection to the energy of life. None of that, though, none of that leads to any kind of dogma. There's from those religious experiences, there's no evidence of divine intervention. There's no evidence of a creator God. There's no evidence of a being who judges or who watches. There's no evidence of virgin births and burning bushes and any of that. The religious texts are stories, they're narratives of a self-aware organism who is struggling with its own finitude amidst self-awareness. I mean, I think if you try to do, again, let's go back to the original statement, and I guess I'll try to be done. There's a very wandering around video here. But if it's finite but not self-aware, I think we're going to say that's lots of degrees of organisms, okay? Again, we imagine different forms of organisms as, again, as not fully self-aware. Now, are they? I don't think that they are. Do they have awareness? Yes. Is there some sort of consciousness? Yes. Is there the self-aware consciousness that we have? I guess I don't think so. If they did, I think we'd see religions cropping up in them. But yeah, the finite but not self-aware, you don't experience guilt. Self-aware but not finite, you wouldn't experience guilt. And there again, I get this sort of, we can't really imagine that, but I think we imagine something like the gods. We imagine something like an eternal being, and my sense is that the human notion of something like self-aware but not finite came from experiences with language. Language introduces symbols and forms of experience that don't decay and rot. That is, words allow for an experience of timelessness. Now, it may not be ultimate timelessness by scientific measures, but to the earliest humans, the way in which a word transcends space and time, it was a mysterious power. I mean, this is why there's so many religious texts that talk about, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the degree to which words are in the image of a kind of eternality or a timelessness, or that they bear a kind of awareness. I mean, they have a power in them. But we're humans. We're both. We're finite. We will die one day, and that is a fact. And we are self-aware, and I think that is a fact. When those two come together, guilt comes out, partly because the being wants to imagine that it's not as dependent as it is. I mean, the self-awareness screams out, I'm not that dependent, and yet we we recognize the dependence. We try to expiate that guilt in various ways. Through Western history, organized, institutionalized strategies have been developed to try to help people have a system to expiate their guilt. And I mean, the argument would be, yeah, organized religions emerged out of guilt. They didn't come along and invent the notion of guilt and try to get people harnessed into their religion by way of inculcating guilt. No, it's because people are naturally guilty, they naturally are baffled by existence. They're overwhelmed by it, and they flee from their guilt into some kind of dogma or sanctioned institution. Right? I mean, I think that's, you want to ask, why are people so easily inculcated? I mean, why is it that people are willing to believe such stories? That to me is a much more interesting question than the top down. I think too many folks, from my view, are trying to do this religions imposed from top down, and I would say no. Religions, they do have historical precedence that makes that phenomena real. I don't think we want to deny that, but that's not the sole origin of it. That's not really even the critical moment of it. The critical moment of it is how our self-aware finite organisms naturally yearning for some kind of story, some kind of account that helps them deal with this problem. Because I think what we're going to say is that the ultimate obstacle for the self-aware finite organism is to try to deny that finitude. And so death denial becomes the major strategy that religions have harnessed into. Religions have given the institutionalized story which says you don't really die, and it tries to cover over the finite part of self-awareness. It's hiding from it, and then that builds in deeper guilt. Right, it's ineffective in actually expiating the guilt, and I think this is why I'm saying. I think this is why earlier peoples were maybe more honest about their dependency. They had a collectivist strategies of guilt expiation. So in huge collective rituals, people would accumulate, surplus goods, and they would leave it as a gift for the gods. And the origin of sacrifice in human history is an origin of people having to give something back to the gods. And again, the origin of afterlife stories and of beliefs in the afterlife and immortal souls. These relate back to language, and for the yearning of an organism who feels guilt from being both self-aware and finite, trying to cover over that finitude. And okay, so those would be some thoughts. Hope everyone is well. Happy Thanksgiving, and take care. Bye.